is National Young Writers Month. I'm Fiona Dunn, the creative producer of Express Media, and with us today is Lucy Adams for The Art of Editing. Lucy Adams is a fiction editor at Voiceworks. She was an editor and coordinator of last year's Melbourne International Film Festival Buzzcuts program and now produces podcasts for Myth. She studies filmmaking at VCA and is a self-appointed feminist killjoy in her class. When we begin today, you can join the conversation and ask questions by tweeting us using the hashtag NYWM15. Now, Lucy, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm a fiction editor at Voiceworks, and that's been sort of what most of my editing experience has been. So a lot of the stuff that I talk about today will be sort of in relation to that. So your experience of editing, the editing process, will really vary from publication to publication. So keep that in mind. But hopefully this will be useful in some way, no matter what you're doing. Also, a lot of this is going to be like covering sort of the basics for writers who've never been edited before. So yeah, maybe if you've had like a whole bunch of experience being edited, a lot of it's going to seem pretty obvious, but hopefully, some of you will have something interesting. So the things that I'm sort of going to cover today are just a guide to being edited, and then sort of the basics of structural editing and copy editing. And then we'll go into an example of a fiction piece, my the very first piece that I edited for Voiceworks, and some of the editorial decisions that were made and how that happened. So first up, the guide to being edited. This can be found on this is based off the Voiceworks guide to being edited, which can be found under the contribute drop-down menu. So you can check it out there. I guess the first thing that I want to stress, which may seem like super obvious, is that, there's this, I think a lot of people come in, especially first time sort of writers being edited, come into the editing process thinking that like the hard work is done, like, woo, yay, party time. Like now they just like, give it to me. It's just about like correcting some like, a few sort of stray commas, some spelling, some typos. But that's like, that is a part of it. But it's kind of really like a little tiny part. And it comes at the end, usually, sort of like the proofreading phase. And there's actually a lot more to it than that. And I think some people get a little bit freaked out once they realize just how much is involved. There's actually quite a lot more work to do. So yeah, editor is not your human spell check. They have a relationship with you. There's not one person who isn't sort of, employed. Well, so often that one person is employed by the other person, but it's like a relationship that, is give and take, and you need to communicate a lot with each other. It shouldn't always just be like one person telling the other person what to do. So it should be more about like developing your ideas, clarifying logic, deciding on the appropriate structure. It's about like meaning making, and making sure that meaning is communicated. So the first point we have is engage with your editor. Talk to me. It's not, so it shouldn't just be like the editor saying, do this, and you just being like, oh, okay. It's really a discussion. So while there are generally a number of changes or elements that the editor would like to change or flesh out, or things, to get rid of entirely, it's still your own work. And no one knows it better than you. So it's really important to communicate what you want and what you're trying to say, because the editor is there to help you get that meaning across. And sometimes they just have a bit of a, better outside perspective to help you be clear in communicating what you're trying to get across. So just talk about it. Explain yourself. like we're clearly interested in what you have to say in your work because we selected you for publication in the first place. So yeah, just communication is the key. The second thing is justify your changes. So hopefully, if your editor is, being generous with their words, they will explain thoughtfully and carefully the changes that they would like to make, and what like the reason for it, what they hope to achieve with those changes, rather than just being like, "This is what we want." So it's great if you can do that as well. Like, it helps the editor understand. So for example, if they suggest a change, and you're not on board with that change, or you do just make a change, don't just put it in there. Like, explain why. And it's good to help them, but it's also good to help you think more deeply about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it'll help you clarify what you're trying to do. But yeah, just be aware that if they do suggest a change and you don't agree with it, that they may keep like pushing at the change and like keep trying to convince you to do it, and listen to the reasons why. But it is your work at the end of the day, so I can't make you do anything. Now, this is the next point. Is my one that I added in. Because it may seem really obvious, but it can be a huge problem, which is track your changes. Please track them. It's just so important. Become familiar with track changes in Word, and use it just for every single change. Use it for all your changes, because I have had a couple of cases where, like, a writer has gone through and made a whole bunch of changes, and some of them completely unrelated to things that we discussed. And then, like, looking through, the old document and the new document, like, nothing has been recorded, and it makes things really difficult, because the entire process becomes completely muddy and overwhelming. And yeah, track your changes. The fourth is address changes within your manuscript. So your editor will be asking you a lot of questions throughout the editorial process, hopefully, and generally to do with clarity, characterization, tone, voice, and consistency. Please answer them. Like, often they'll ask changes like within the body of an email or in the comment section down the margin of a Word document. So you just do little comment replies, insert your little comment, just answering all the questions. And sometimes you can spend ages like asking really thoughtful questions that are there for a reason, and then they aren't answered, and that sucks, man, because it's not nice to not feel heard. But sometimes it's not always enough just to answer those questions as they appear. You've got to think about how to sort of weave those questions and those changes actually into the body of the piece itself. It's all very well and good to answer the questions, but you remember, you are writing for an audience, and you've got to address them in your work when you're editing. And if your editor has questions, chances are the readers will too. So yeah, working with the editor is really the best way to draw out what needs to be made clearer, and to ensure that the writing speaks for itself and speaks confidently. Okay, next point is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it's best to avoid, as I said, making too many changes that haven't been suggested by the editor. It can be really tempting to continue working on a piece after it has been selected, and just, you can get a bit carried away with maybe changing too much stuff. And again, this can make the editorial process really muddy and confusing. So yeah, it can be a case of even sometimes an editor will maybe suggest a change. You'll sort of run with it, but it was kind of better closer to what it was originally. So it's a kind of, the pendulum will swing a bit back the other way. So it might just be a case of, oh, that was great, but maybe just keep it how it was before. And again, track that change. Now more to the more sort of boring side of things, which is confirmation email and punctuality. As a general rule, editors sort of run off their feet most of the time, and deadlines for things are really tight. Now, these sort of timelines will vary depending on what kind of publication you're writing for. So Voiceworks, even though it's actually only quarterly, so the deadlines are less tight than with a lot of other publications, there still isn't that much time for the editorial process. So as a courtesy, it's best to send your editor a confirmation email as soon as possible, confirming that you have their first edit and that you're on board, rather than like mulling over what they've said and thinking about it and trying to think of the perfect response. Just get back to them immediately, being like, yes, I'm in, I'm up for being published, I'm cool with the sort of general direction we're going in. Just so they can be like, whew, they're on board. Yeah, and they'll kind of set deadlines throughout of like, this is when I expect to have the first edit back, and second edit, and these deadlines are negotiable, but just make sure that you let them know if you're not going to meet it. Just letting people know what they can expect. But yeah, it's best to stick to those, because otherwise there'll sometimes be like a meltdown later on. So it's best to kind of budget for that early on. And the final point is, all right, I've just had a question here to explain what track changes actually are. Okay, did not see that until now. So track changes is, okay, if I just go into, I'll show an example from a Word document of what track changes are. Screen share. Here we go. So here, okay, it's working. We have an example of a Word document, and if you go into, I think it depends on what version of Word you have, but essentially, if you turn it on, once you start working in a Word document, it'll record all the changes you make like this. So here you can see these words have been deleted, these words have been added in, and then you can also make comments down the side. So here you can see that I just started off making, this is me in the green, I just started off making comments in the green, just asking questions. And in the red is the writer, and this is them starting to address my questions. So you can see the thing that I've done, their response to it, and then here I've asked a question and they've been able to respond to my question in the red there to sort of justify their point. So yeah, and then you can go through and accept or reject those changes. Awesome. I'll just stop sharing that. Back to me. Hello. Great. Where were we? Okay. Back to the final tip on how to be edited, which is, well, on the Voiceworks website, it says read Voiceworks, but in general, I would just say read. And I mean, reading in general, especially the kind of style and the kind of work that you're creating is great just for like getting better at writing. But also reading the specific publications where you would like to be published is really important. As an editor, it's really clear when someone doesn't do this, because they will submit something for publication which is just way out of left field or just unlike anything that has been that has been published before. It's like it's good to submit something that maybe is a bit different, is slightly different to what a publication usually publishes. Maybe a bit of a gap there. But for example, like if someone submitted a review to Voiceworks, clearly they don't really have a general understanding of what Voiceworks does, because we don't publish reviews. We do, fiction, non-fiction, poetry, art. So yeah, here's kind of get an idea of, which sort of platform is the most appropriate for what you want to write. Which one has, the audience that you want to reach. Which, you want it to be online, you want it to be print. You get an idea of, so, maybe last issue, the place we were about to submit published a really, really similar piece, and it actually wouldn't be good for you to submit your piece because it's kind of covering very similar territory. And just kind of the general style. And I think there's also this kind of thing where a lot of people want to be read and a lot of people want to be published, but they don't necessarily read, and the places where they want to be published. So there's a strange dynamic going on there. And hey, it's really good to support your local publications. Okay, so that wraps up the first section of the hangout. Next, I was thinking we could go onto like the basics of editing. So that's like structural editing and copy editing. And I'm going to use a general sort of guide, like my master guide, that was not created by me. It was created by a guy called Adolfo, who is kind of like he's some kind of sweet mystical god, editing genius, former editor of Voiceworks, was a deputy editor at Voiceworks, and now is the editor of Metro. So just like kind of a super genius, and his legacy lives on, and I should probably form a shrine to Adolfo, but he's kindly allowed to let me share with everyone his sort of general guide to editing. And this is kind of what I will look at when editing a piece. I'd go through these general steps, but also would be good for someone who's just wanting to edit themselves, which is really hard. It's really hard to edit your own work, but it's very important. So yeah, this is before you get to the grammar, to the spelling, to all of that, you got to go through the structural editing and the copy editing. And it can really vary, like how much your piece is going to be edited. Your editor should give you a general idea of the level of edit, whether it's going to be like a heavy edit with lots of material being put in and taken out, or whether it's going to be a bit lighter on the structural editing and kind of cutting straight to the copy editing. And it's at that point where you're kind of getting given an idea of how heavy the edit is going to be, is where you can kind of figure out if you're comfortable with it. So if the suggested edit is essentially changing the very core, the very heart of your piece, and you're just not comfortable with that, then it's worth saying that from the outset, because maybe it's going to turn out that it's not the right fit between you and the place that you want to be published. Okay, so maybe I will share with you just this document here. Cool. Just a second. Okay, you should be able to see that now. So I'll run through it quickly. You can sort of read it yourself. But yeah, structural editing, focusing on substance and structure. So substance, you look out for co-spar. These are amazing. Yeah, so that's pretty much just, content, what is there, what is not there, what should and shouldn't be there. Next we have style and form. How is it presented? Does it work? Think of the pacing, the rhythm, the logic, the order, the linking. Purpose. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to do? Why is this piece written this way? Is the way you presented the piece effective in achieving this? Audience. Who are the readers? What do they think, feel, assume, want? How can you best communicate the message or story to them? Who are you submitting to? What are their expectations? Then we have structure, flock. So the F is flow, which is the pace and the rhythm. Logic, so your argument, believability, conclusion. Order, is it chronological? Is it episodic? Is there signposting? Cohesion, so linking the ideas together, contrasting between elements and ideas, reiterating your points. And then after that, so usually, okay, what are we doing? Usually, what I will do is I will address a lot of the structural edits in like the body of an email. So, so like this is the main thing. This is the main point, the main thing you should focus on. Let everything sort of channel into this. We need to have, more, we suggest having more focus on this element, or, sort of minimizing another aspect of the piece. And then when it comes, and address those things first, because they're the most important. Once you have those things down, it's all downhill from there. And then after doing that, then you get on to the copy editing. And often I'll address copy editing within the document itself. So by inserting comments along the margins using track changes. So, and in general, in terms of copy edits, instead of just applying them myself, instead of just changing things, I'll ask questions, or I'll ask the writer to rephrase things, because you don't want to tamper with the writer's voice. You don't want to hijack the writer's story, or in any way compromise their voice. It's much better, that the writer changes it themselves. So I'll get the document back up, and then we can have a look through just very quickly, some of the basics of copy editing. So C to the power of 4F. Oh my God, maths. So first we have clarity. Are there any ambiguities? Any unnecessary words, verbose language? Does it say what it means? Does it mean what it says? We have consistency. Does the point, the message, or the plot, change throughout? Does the dialogue or action seem forced? Any out of nowhere events, assertions, or conclusions? Then we have completeness. Has anything been left out, especially after the structural edit, which probably should have dealt with that? Are there any final content issues, sort of enough to mention but minor enough to quickly fix? Correctness. This is finally the point where we get around to grammar, spelling, punctuation, fact checking, looking out for typos. Is the syntax, the way you've arranged the words, as clear as possible? Then there's formatting and house style. And you should check out the publication you're submitting to get a sense of this. Cool. So I was thinking maybe we could now look at an example. And the example I was wanting to look at, where are we going? Is the first story I ever edited for Voiceworks, called Oliver Has an Interview. It's written by Mark Yao. Yao! Shout out to Yao. He kindly gave me permission to use his work. It was published in issue number 97, Habit. And it's a bit awkward to kind of talk about editing a fiction piece. It would be easier if I was a poetry editor because I could just like read you the poem and then it would be very clear. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what the story is about. Also, if anyone's interested in, if anyone doesn't have a copy of Have It and wants to listen to the story, there I think there's a version of it that's been read online read on radio, and you can find it online on Sin Radio's website. I think it was read on Art Smitten. But yeah, Oliver has an interview by Mark Yao. So I'll read you the opening line. As soon as he had finished his resume, which was very late, Oliver opened his bathroom window, turned into a hawk, and took off into the depths of Ueno Park. Or Ueno Park. I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry. I love that opening line. It really grabbed me the first time that I read it. It's so simple and it's so weird. It's great. So essentially, after the opening line, Oliver transforms into a hawk, flies out into the Tokyo night. He meets up with a bear at a park zoo, and they have a great chat about Oliver's career hopes. Things get very philosophical. The next morning, Oliver wakes up and transforms back into a human. He's running late for a job interview. Oh no! So it's a race against time. He almost misses the bus, but makes it just in time. He's forgotten his wallet, but a girl on the bus pays for his fare. Then he misses his second connecting bus and loses his resume in the peak hour crowd. So he begins running through the traffic, transforms back into a hawk and shoots into the air. And the story then shifts into a high-rise office building, the office of Junichiro, the man who'll be interviewing Oliver for the job. He's jaded and sick of these really cookie-cutter interviewees. And then Oliver appears naked because of all of his clothes have sort of flown off with the speed of his flight, and Junichiro smiles, and that's where it ends. So Mark was an absolute dream to edit. Lightning fast responses to all of my emails, really receptive to changes, but didn't always just agree to them immediately. If he believed something was really important, he would explain why. It ended up being quite a heavy edit, with a lot of material taken out and new stuff written. This isn't necessarily because I insisted on huge changes or demanded that Mark write a heap of new stuff, but more because he really ran with the suggestions and wrote a lot of new material. He's a really fast writer, so I would suggest something, and if he'd have a new section sort of written that night. This isn't always the case. Sometimes there'll only be minor structural changes, and you're not expected to come up with that new material that quickly. So the strength of the piece we felt was the style. So there's, the simplicity of the writing, this kind of weird, vivid imagery, sort of absurd nature of the piece. And we thought the opening part and the conversation with the bear was really strong. But the middle section on the bus, or the two buses, wasn't quite as strong. So the main suggestion, the main structural editing suggestion, was to edit down the middle section about catching the bus. This was for a number of reasons. For consistency, because there seemed to be a bit of a disconnect between the opening part with the bear and the part on the bus, and there wasn't much linking the two together. It never really returned to the bear or any interactions with any other animals, and they felt very distinct from each other rather than building towards the same sort of message, the same point. And there was a sort of a shift in tone and style from sort of this absurd tone and style to then it kind of just disappeared. The second reason was for pace. The middle section was there was a kind of a slump in the momentum. So we wanted to cut that down in order to sort of speed it up a bit. And in terms of the content of the piece, the main editorial suggestion was to cut out the female character, the girl who offers to pay for his bus fare. She just felt out of place, more like a plot point than a real character. It's quite common for female characters to be used sort of as narrative devices or just another event along the way in a male character's arc. So it's almost better to not have her in there at all and use that space to explore more of a distinguished and developed arc of the protagonist, rather than just have her there for these kind of unclear reasons as sort of an underdeveloped narrative device. But so yeah, I asked the writer to think about the character and how she contributed to the story and what he was really trying to say and what was really the point of the piece, and whether he thought her being included really contributed to that. And so once this content was edited down, there was then much more room to play and create new material. So instead of including a female character as a narrative device, there was more space to explore Oliver's character arc. I encouraged the writer to think about, further developing the contrast between Oliver as a human and Oliver as a hawk, and the difference between how the character moved and felt and acted and behaved. Because prior to this, it was a little bit inconsistent between the descriptions and it was used a bit inconsistently, the animal imagery. So I wanted there to be a clear distinction there. And in terms of evening out the tone, there were some of these great lines, such as his limbs no longer flailed like a struck carp. But they were sort of really located to the very beginning and the very end, and I wanted these to sort of be woven throughout so that the writing style was a bit more consistent. So he ended up adding in this great conversation between the bear and a crow later on, which really broke up the action on the bus. And by continuing that narrative thread with the bear, it made the style more consistent. But oh wow, I think we're running out of time. Woo! Yeah, so I'll just give you a quick look at just one version of the edit. Here we go. You can see that there. So the title of the piece changed. It was initially called When the Time Fell Back in Joint. So I suggested changing that from the outset. But here you can see this is just a copy edit that Mark then followed up on in the piece, about just clarifying the language and what it meant. Here, this one's an interesting edit in terms of understanding your audience. So obviously Voiceworks is a primarily Australian audience, and the story was set in Japan. And here there's a reference to the diet, but the D of diet is put in caps. And I had absolutely no idea what it meant. And I think I looked it up and I couldn't find it. So I think it was safe to say that the audience, the reader of Voiceworks, wouldn't understand what that meant, which wasn't to say I wanted to dumb it down or exclude it. I was just being like, hey, could you clarify what this means for me? And turns out the Diet is the name referring to Japan's parliamentary assembly. Like ours, it has both an upper house and a lower house. It's in there as a tongue-in-cheek joke. Japanese parliament is in fact typically very staid and peaceable, with neighbouring Korea's parliament being the one known for more pugilistic debates. Look at Korea Parliament fight on YouTube. It's amusing and weird at the same time. So the writer was really generous with me in terms of the knowledge that he was willing to give. And yeah, so that was really cool, sort of finding out that stuff. And then in a later edit, that was kind of hinted at and incorporated into this section here, so that a wider section of the audience could appreciate that. Here, Marcus is responding to some of my copy edits. So, just clarifying that it's changing back into a human, just clarifying the language there from hawk to human. I think a lot of these copy edits are to do with removing some of repetition of wording and repetition of phrasing, just so that it flowed better. And also cutting down the length of the sentences so they were a bit easier to read. And here you can see quite a lot of material was removed and added in. Wow, it looks very heavy there. You can see all the comments on the sides. And we also ended up changing the ending and cutting down the ending there. But I think we're running out of time there, unfortunately. But I will just stop sharing that. So yeah, I'm sure I had to be a bit rushed there, but thank you for all that, listening in. Hey.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was really fantastic. And thank you for tuning in for this National Young Writers Month online event. Lucy, that was absolutely fantastic. There were so many key points that we can take away from that. And if you missed the beginning of the conversation, you can catch up on our YouTube channel, and the whole online, every single event that we've done is up there for you now. So Express Media's National Young Writers Month is occurring throughout the month of June. You can tune in tomorrow for Freelance 101 with Neha Kale. And if you want to hear more from Lucy, she doesn't have a website or a Twitter or anything like that.
I have no web presence.
But we love her anyway, and you can probably catch her on the Voiceworks Mag Twitter. I'm sure if you have any questions, you can direct them to Voiceworks, and they'll be able to help you out. That is Voiceworks Mag on Twitter or online. Until tomorrow, happy National Young Writers Month, and we'll see you again soon.